Hi, everyone. Welcome to Film Independent Presents. My name is Matt Warren. I am the Senior Manager of Digital Content here at Film Independent. And today we are here to talk about one of my favorite films of the year, The Voyeurs, which is now available to stream on Amazon Prime Video.
You can see right in.
Check out those two. What is he, like a photographer? Oh, they're in love.
I don't think we should spy on our neighbors.
Right. Oh, they're
Just because someone is allowing you to look in on their lives doesn't mean it's okay to watch.
This might be a little problematic.
I've been having dreams.
I just wish we could hear what they were saying.
I've been having dreams.
Don't you ever feel guilty?
I've been having dreams.
It's like when you're so obsessed with something, you forget to look around and go, what am I even doing?
Would it be strange if I asked to take your picture?
And to do that, we have that film's incredible writer and director, Michael Mohan. Welcome, Michael. It's so great to have you.
Thanks for having me, Matt. Appreciate it.
So to start with this conversation, I want to sort of talk about this era of erotic thrillers that The Voyeurs is sort of growing, the tradition of film that is sort of growing out of. So to begin, if you could just talk about your relationship to this sort of odd and occasionally disreputable erotic thriller genre, and how those films have sort of informed your path to this film.
Yeah, well, I kind of came to them a little late. I had made this short film that played festivals back in 2015 called Pink Grapefruit, where sort of up to that point, I had been known for, not known, but like I had made a bunch of independent projects that just sort of dealt with human relationships. And with that short, I was just trying to inject a subtle level of suspense into what was naturally happening. And I've used eroticism in that film and in another short film prior called XX. And after that experience with that short film and seeing it screen with audiences and feeling that sense of temperature, rise in the auditorium when they play, I wanted to figure out how to do it on a bigger scale and paint on a bigger canvas, and trying to figure out like what do audiences want, what are they missing, and how can sort of what I do naturally fit into that conversation. And it was around that time that I saw Fatal Attraction for the very first time. And films like that, films like Unfaithful, Adrian Lyne's films, Body Heat, Wild Things. There's so many, and nobody's making them. They sort of stopped making them, and I watched them all. Like, they're so easy to watch. They're so easy. Like, it's Tuesday night. What are we going to watch? Yeah, we'll watch, Unlawful Entry, or, A Jagged Edge, or any of these movies. They're still so fun. And the good ones are able to sneak in these complex, human relationships and complex themes. And so I just sort of fell in love with the genre. I didn't understand why people weren't making them. And so the aspiration to make this movie was sort of born out of that.
And what's your theory as to why people don't make these sorts of movies anymore?
Okay, I'm curious. I've been asked this question a lot, and I had an epiphany. I'm curious. Why do you think they stopped?
Well, I think on the studio level, it's, I imagine, part of just the extraction of the sort of mid-tier studio programmer in general, but a lot of that stuff has reinvented itself as streaming content and television episodic content, but not specifically this genre. And I don't know, my guess might just be that people are afraid, or afraid of the material, afraid of the eroticisms. So that would be my guess.
Yeah, I wondered, because like the last sort of proper, if you discount like the 50 Shades of Grey movies, right, which I don't think are really thrillers, right? Like the last true erotic thriller, I think, was Unfaithful in 2002, I think. And so I was thinking about this, like it's also a time when streaming internet video sort of came to power. And so I wonder if there's some sort of connection to like the fact that if you're going to be in one of these movies, then suddenly, it can be viewed online. If that might have sort of evolved into how chaste movies sort of have become, and that now we're sort of used to this and we can ignore it, and we can choose to ignore it, and therefore we can create works that are a little bit more daring. But I don't know, this is me completely theorizing, because Unfaithful made $120 million. You'd think there'd be like a bunch of copycats right after that movie came out, but there weren't.
No, it is unusual. And there's a great tradition of, and I say this like in the most complimentary way, but these like perverted thrillers kind of going all the way back to Alfred Hitchcock. And then obviously Brian De Palma followed in those films, that in those footsteps rather. And I imagine you drew from those two filmmakers and Body Double and Rear Window, and perhaps you're even sick of talking about it at this point, but I'd love to talk about your relationship to Vertigo, or Rear Window rather, and Body Double.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. It's like you can't make a movie like this without watching all the what I call binocular subgenre, And Rear Window is definitely a touchstone, and especially just because in Rear Window, like people don't know this, like Rear Window has plot holes. Like there are things about Rear Window that do not add up. Like he moves a body in the middle of the night and nobody sees it, and so. Anyways, it's all of those things that make you realize like, oh, if the audience is on the ride, if they're having a good time with this movie, they're going to see it through to the end and just have a good time. And but Body Double, I didn't actually see until after I had finished the script. And then I watched it and I was like, oh, there's so many touch points here. My favorite thing about Body Double is the drill. And how the killer's drill is, I looked this up because I was like, this is so much like Slumber Party Massacre. If you've ever seen Slumber Party Massacre.
I haven't seen it, no.
Oh, it's fantastic. It's directed by a woman. It's really like, it's a piece of like, it's serious feminist cinema. And he did that as an homage to Slumber Party Massacre, which I think is really fun. But yeah, I saw it afterwards, and it's kind of strange, but like I have to be honest, like I have become a De Palma fan because of my film, but I wasn't the biggest De Palma fan. I wasn't thinking about his movies going in. I think the outside of Adrian Lyne's movies, from a writing perspective, because his directing is, I don't think he quite has like you don't see it like. The visual style of Indecent Proposal is so different from the visual style of Fatal Attraction. Seems like he's more of like someone who responds to the visual trends of the time. Right. But I was going back to things like The Conversation, right. Mm-hmm. Which is very grounded and down to earth. And the locations are really, really speak to who the characters are. But you get that sense of like someone who's getting sucked down this rabbit hole based on this tiny sliver of information. And so that sort of had actually a greater impact on me than some of the things that would seem a little bit more obvious.
And when you're working on a screenplay for a story like this, I'm always curious where the core idea is, and then how does it grow out? Do you kind of start with the reversals that you imagine happening at the end of the film and find out a way to back into them, or do you kind of start with this surface idea and then figure out how to subvert it or invert it, or how does that work?
Yeah. So I think we should say, like right now, if anybody is watching this video and you haven't watched this movie, stop, turn this off, go watch the movie. We'll still be here. Come back and then we'll answer this question. Okay. Go watch it. All right. So the people here have seen this movie, right? Okay. So I knew from the outset, the instant I had this idea. So I was visiting a friend who lives in downtown LA. He had just moved into this loft apartment. I looked out his window and I saw this couple across across the street who are wandering around their apartment like completely naked, right?
Wow.
And I looked to my friend, I was like, hey, do you know your neighbors? Like they're right there. And he's like, oh, are they naked again? And I was like, oh, do they do this all the time? He's like, yeah, they do. In fact, he had bought binoculars from the local pawn shop. He was like, you want to take a look? And I was like, I wanted to, but I also knew it was wrong. And so I knew there was something there. And I also knew there was something that like that, like, as I was sort of unpacking the idea, I was thinking about the idea of Instagram and the grass is always greener. And the fact that we're always like, it's sort of like that was a literal version of this thing that we all do on a day to day. But like to make a movie about Instagram, it's like, who wants to see that? You know, the last thing I want in movies is more cell phones. But I figured I could tap into the sentiment that we all feel when we discover someone online and decide to like pour through their history of, you know, that we know may not even be, it's curated and we know it may not be real or it may not be, you know, a true indication of it's never a true indication of who that person is. It's an indication of what that person wants us to think they are. And when I sort of clicked into that, I was like, oh, okay. So the people across the way, they're putting on this is a show. If it's Instagram, this isn't real. You know, oh, maybe there's a flip. Maybe the Voyeurs actually belong to, maybe that's who, maybe that the title applies to the people across the way.
Yeah.
And so I figured out the twist first. And then everything else was to make that twist satisfying, even down to like the construction. Who are the characters that would be most apt to fall into this trap? And then, you know, the writing process then became about like, okay, well, you know, this is the movie, not a limited series. And so what's the least amount of information I need to provide in order to make this, once people are on the ride, what's the least amount of information I need to provide in order for people to make it, to have a fun ride to the end.
And it really does have that really economical sort of clockwork thing that I love from those De Palma movies and films like The Conversation and stuff. I'd like to talk about sort of the use of, and we sort of touched on it in our discussion of why this genre of film seems to have evaporated this century, but the use of like nudity and eroticism in the film. And I want to talk about your approach to sort of using that as a filmmaking tool, and then how do you approach that sort of sensitively, both in what you're depicting and how you're staging it behind the camera? Yeah,
totally. Well, I'll answer your second part first. Yeah. So in terms of how to stage these sex scenes or the scenes of intimacy now, I mean, now that there are intimacy coordinators, it makes your job so much easier. But the work involved in these scenes actually began even before I cast the actors. When I was approaching the cast, I would send them a little book, like a director's book that had sort of my vision for the movie and where it came from and why I wanted to make the movie. And there was a little section devoted to, it was a picture of the band Salt and Peppa. And at the top it said, let's talk about sex. And it was sort of how I wanted to, you know, I didn't want to just abide by current intimacy coordinator guidelines. I wanted to set a new bar. And I wanted to talk about how I was going to set that bar by allowing the actors to feel to have agency and a voice in how their body is portrayed. And so they walked in knowing that, yes, this was a movie with sex. And if that made them uncomfortable, they shouldn't do the movie because the scenes are in the script. But how I was going to film that was going to be a collaborative process. And from there, once they signed on, I made a second book that was just all about the intimacy, where I talked about each scene in granular detail. I had screenshots from other movies that represented angles that I was hoping to get. I talked like sort of very clinically about like, okay, in this scene, we might see the side of your breast, but we, you know, like very, very clinically.
Right.
And then I gave that to Amanda Blumenthal, our intimacy coordinator. And I said, no pressure. This is the vision. This is my vision for it. But this is an early vision of it. You know, this isn't this is malleable because these are the actors that we cast, and I want them to have a voice and be protected. And so she was able to have a conversation with the actors that was really, because you read a sex scene in a script and oftentimes it's just like a handful of sentences. And so you don't know what the director has in mind. And here it was like almost like clinical detail. And so she's able to have that conversation with the actor where I'm not present. And therefore even though I'd like to think that I'm a pretty approachable and easy guy to talk to, like it completely removes any power dynamic between an actor and a director, because actors want to make directors happy. And here they have a chance to be like, ooh, I don't want to do this. Or, hey, I actually want to go further. In some cases, they're like, I want to go further here. I really want to, I think that this scene should be X, Y, and Z. And then Amanda is able to take that back to me. We have a meeting about it, and it's all sort of expectations have been set. I can then talk to the cinematographer discreetly about sort of what the challenges may or may not be. And then we sort of figure out the blocking to satisfy the actors. And obviously it could change from there too. Like there are times where, if an actor were to show, even though there's like a nudity, like there's like a rider that they sign.
Yeah.
But if they show up on set and they don't want to do it that day, well, no one's going to make them do it. Well, we always had like a plan of attack if someone became uncomfortable, or if someone just that day felt bloated, you know what I mean? Like you figure it out and you just be cool people to work with. You just be good human beings, and it's pretty easy. And so the intimacy coordinator made all of that possible. And then, on the day she's there to make sure that all the expectations are met. She closes the set. She helps with breath mints and things like that.
Right.
But in terms of the approach, you had also asked about the approach to nudity.
Yeah.
And so I think, I don't want to be an apologist for this, because I think that films I think part of it's just like cinema has been so chaste. It seems so bizarrely out of the ordinary to see a movie with nudity. Mm-hmm. And we constantly go, like I watched a movie this weekend where a person got stabbed and the knife went through their chin and out their nose. And it was like a mainstream movie that just came out, and no one's up in arms about that. But the instant you show a pair of boobs, it's like, oh my God, whoa, what is this filmmaker doing? And so I don't want to be an apologist for that. But I do think in this film, the film's about voyeurism. It's called The Voyeurs. It's about looking at something you don't feel like you should be seeing, or being turned on by something and then wondering if you should be honoring those biological desires, both with the characters and with the audience. And so I felt justified in doing it. I felt justified in that this is the best way to articulate that theme. And I tried to be tactful in terms of how the nudity was sort of deployed. I mean, in some instances, when you're shooting a shot through binoculars, everything was, we stay in the POV of Pippa and Thomas the whole time, right? I'm never getting coverage across the way that I couldn't get. And so when you're in a shot that can't be any tighter than waist up, if you're a woman and you take off your clothes, there's no way to frame that shot otherwise, so it's sort of just practically speaking, there was that constraint. But then, again, it's just part of the allure, I think, that fits into the theme.
Yeah, I don't think a film like this works without, you can't go halfway with a film like this and have it hit the way that you want it to.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the performance, but truly, if any of the actors did show up and didn't want to do it, we had a plan. It just wouldn't be I just don't think the film would be as visceral, but I would still be very happy to make that, it's such like with this sort of thing, it's such a collaboration that no matter, you can't go into it with this grand vision of like, well, it has to be this way, because you would be a really awful human being if you weren't able to be malleable with that vision. So, well, yeah, I think I just got lucky in that the actors were very brave and very bold and wanted to achieve this vision of the movie. And I think I think the primary sex scene in this film is the scene I am most proud of in anything that I've ever done.
Well, I wanted to maybe step outside the sex scenes and talk more about this, your collaboration with the actors in general, and particularly with Sydney, who is terrific in the film. And
thank you. Yeah,
really wouldn't work without it. And I know that you guys had worked together on Everything Sucks, and maybe talk through the process of putting her into this role and how you developed this character with her.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I think this character, so yeah, I worked with Sydney years ago, and she's incredible. Like, we had only scratched the surface of what she was capable of, and and she's also just very down to earth and very, like, she's a bookworm. She reads all the time. She was kind of the den mother to she was a little bit older than the other actors, and so she like took them under her wing and would organize trips with them and things. She's just like a really, really, really top-notch human being. And so I knew that when I was making this film, like this character, she makes a lot of decisions that the audience may not agree with. And so I needed someone really down to earth in order to be able for audiences to want to go down those rabbit holes with her. Right. And so it was a no-brainer. I was, as a fan, it made all the sense in the world. As a friend, I was obviously nervous to ask her because the intimacy, but with all it turned out to not be an issue at all. And when we were working on her character, for me, it was like just trying to tap into the side of Sydney that I knew, that I personally knew. That's not to say that there aren't differences between Sydney Sweeney and Pippa. There are, but there's like this goofy, enthusiastic bookworm side to Sydney that I just knew if I could just get her to lean into that side of herself, it was innate. It was not going to take much work, Right. And I think that her and our rapport is, I don't take myself, the work is very hard. And so I try not to take myself too seriously. I try to make sure the actors never feel like I think the worst way to direct is if the actors feel like they're like getting it right or getting it wrong. I think the process of I love it when an actor tries something and without any regards to whatever the outcome goal might be, because oftentimes if they're trying something, they're being present in some kind of reality that maybe is even better than what I would come up with. And so my job is often just to be a cheerleader and to be like the person that's just trying to encourage spontaneity. And then you shape it from there. And so I think that sort of our it was the same cinematographer, same production designer as Everything Sucks. And so there was like an element of just like, we're back in rural Oregon making this thing with our friends, even though we're on this giant stage and she's the lead of a movie for Amazon. But I didn't want that pressure. I didn't want any of us to feel any kind of pressure,
Yeah. And that's, I'm glad you ended on that button, because I want to talk about being on this ginormous stage. Obviously this depends so much on the sort of geometry of the frame and how you're picturing this world. Can you talk a little bit about the set design of the film and sort of realizing that?
Yeah, well, Adam Reamer he's our production designer, a very good friend, and so talented, beyond talented. I'm just so lucky to, I worked with him on Everything Sucks because he was primarily because he was based in Portland, and he had worked on like shows like Grimm and things like that, and I just loved his vibe. But then we became really, really good friends, and then it turns out he is just so exceptional at trying to figure out how to create spaces that feel like they accurately reflect who the characters are, and B, untangle the logistical issues with actually trying to like make it believable, because essentially what we had to, it was really complicated. We had to find the practical location, like the actual, like the exterior of the building and all of that. We had to find that in reality. Right. And not only that, our location manager, Lou Bengal, who is like my hero, he had to then clear all the apartments, all the buildings, but then also all the people who lived in that apartment had to say like, oh yeah, it's okay if a movie shoots here for 3 days, which is like crazy hard. And once we had that sort of hero, like practical location, we then had to design the 9th floor of each of those things on a stage. And so the facade of the building, like the outside of it, like the brick on one side and like the steel on the other, had to mimic the dimensions of the real location. But then the interior of what they looked like we did it we sort of created it ourselves. Like we created whatever, like the layout isn't what the real building is like.
Right.
And within that layout, we had to map out the vantage point. Like if you're in Thomas's office, for instance, you can't really like see into certain aspects of the room. And so we were like, because the walls, like you're right, the geometry was tricky. Yeah. And similarly, Elijah and I had to really map it all out using, because the movie's primarily set. It wasn't like just, I didn't want to repeat a shot. I wanted every scene to have a different, to feel unique and different without it being gimmicky, you know? And so we had to plot all of these things out perfectly. And yeah, it was just, that was the challenge of the movie, was actually figuring all of that out. Yeah.
And we were talking a little bit before we started rolling here, and you said it's sort of been a crazy week watching the reactions to the film online. How has the response to the film surprised you, or confused you, or encouraged you?
It's been very encouraging. I've been working on this thing since 2016, and I had this idea for a twist in 2016. And now it's finally 2021, and I get to open up Twitter and see animated GIFs of people's jaws dropping to the floor because they didn't see this twist coming. And regardless of what you think of the movie, I think that the twist is something that people do not predict. And that to me feels like I can only imagine that it must be like what a magician feels when they like step off the stage, you know?
Yeah.
And it feels very gratifying. And it really makes me excited that this genre that has gone dormant for so long maybe has a chance at a second life, and maybe I'll be able to be at the forefront of bringing it back in this hopefully socially conscious way.
I certainly hope so as well. Well, and to that end, my final question here: are you at liberty to discuss anything you are working on next? Did I freeze?
Well, I can tell you what I'm doing right now simultaneously, but I've also, I within the erotic thriller, within this subgenre of erotic thriller, there are other subgenres, right? You've got movies like Body Heat and Wild Things that are more like, sweaty noirs, right? You have films like ours that is more like a steamy moral dilemma, where it's like the audience goes, okay, what would you do? And then you also have the blank from hell movies, like The Nanny from Hell in Hand That Rocks the Cradle, or The Roommate from Hell in Single White Female. And I have an idea I really want to do a moral dilemma that's couched in a blank from hell movie, where the concept is just so sticky that, you can see the poster, you can see the trailer, and you're just like, yep, that's a blank from hell movie, and it's steamy. And I wonder what I would do if I was stuck in that situation. But I want to do it I want the next one to not be set in 2 rooms. Let's just say that.
Yeah. Well, I can't wait to see that film. I certainly think you're serving a market that's been underserved for far too long. And,
thank you, Matt. I appreciate that.
And I really love the film, and I just want to thank you again for taking the time to hang out with us and our viewers.
Well, thank you for helping spread the word. I really, really appreciate it.